Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to give a short presentation for your family history event in the Charlie Stake. I remember being there in person a few years ago, for a couple of times, and I really enjoyed being there. Today, I'm going to do that through Zoom, through a recorded lecture, and I hope that is going to work just fine for you as well. So, my name is Ugo Perego. I am currently a coordinator for SNI and the director of the Rome Institute of Religion here in Italy. I also have a PhD in genetics, and I've been working on and studying and presenting on the topic of genetic genealogy for more than 20 years now. Today, I'm going to give a very brief introduction to what genetic genealogy is. I would assume most of you probably are already familiar with that, so I apologize if this is information you already know. But it could be something new for some of you, and I hope you enjoyed the information I'll share with you. So what is genetic genealogy? Genetic genealogy is a combination of traditional genealogical information, basically how we are related to each other, and using DNA or genetic information to verify, extend, prove those type of relationship, perhaps even pointing out to some of those connections and family relationship that we are not aware of yet. And so genetics and applied to genealogy becomes a new tool in the family historian toolbox with the purpose, again, to bring people together. Traditionally, genealogy is done using records like birth certificates or marriage records or census. And in some cases, that information could be misleading or incomplete. In some incomplete. In some cases, in other cases, there could be a lack of those documents, perhaps because there is an undocumented genealogy, undocumented adoption or an illegitimacy. And nowadays we have also like many kids that are um, born through maybe like a sperm donor and don't know who their father is. So genetic genealogy kind of brings shed some light on this type of relationship that might be more complicated. So, what is the basis of it? Well, first of all, everyone is DNA. So, you might not know who your parents or grandparents or great grandparents are, but definitely you have some DNA that you have inherited from them. Um, every single person is the result of two individuals, a father and a mother DNA. And so, we carry within ourselves a literal book of our family history that is encoded in our genes. The more the closer some people is related to us, the more DNA we share with them, and then on the other hand, the more distantly related we are to somebody, that amount of DNA will decrease and eventually disappear in some of the lines. There are four major types of DNA inherited that can be used for family history purposes. We're going to cover them all very quickly today. They're known as the Y chromosome, mitochondrial DNA, autosomal DNA, and also in some cases, X chromosome can be helpful in family history. Now, before we talk about how these four methods, these four markers are used in family history, I'm just going to give just one slide on science, on genetics, on biology to help us understand where our DNA is found. So we have cells, trillions of cells, that form our body, and almost all of them, with few exceptions, are formed by a cell membrane, which contains a number of organelles and fluid and other elements that are necessary for the cell survival and the cell function. Um, but inside the core of most of these cells have a nucleus. So we have inside the nucleus our genome or nuclear DNA, nuclear because it's found in the nucleus. And that is what you see here on the left. is the nuclear DNA made up of 23 pairs of chromosomes. 23 we receive from our mom, 23 from our dad. 22 of the 23 chromosomes are referred to autosomes. So we have 23 pairs of nuclear chromosomes. 22 pairs are known as autosomes, thus autosomal DNA. And the last set, the 23rd set of chromosomes, are known as the sex chromosomes, which determines mostly the gender. That's the main function, is to determine the gender of the offspring. There are other functions associated to this last set of chromosomes, but that's what we're going to call them. And we're going to have the Y chromosome, which you saw before in the slide before, and it's also used for genetic genealogy. And we have the X chromosome, also used for genetic genealogy. So autosomal DNA, X chromosome, and Y chromosome, all nuclear DNA. There is another component found inside the cell, is a second type of genome. We have two genomes. We have the nuclear genome inside the nucleus, and then outside of the nucleus, but still within the cell, what is called the extra nuclear fluid or plasma. We have the extra nuclear plasma. We have these small organelles called mitochondria. And inside mitochondria, there are several copies of mitochondrial DNA, which is a circular genome, circular in shape. It's about 16,000, 17,000 bases long, while the nuclear genome is about 3.2 billion bases long. So a lot more genetic information in the nuclear genome than it is in the mitochondrial DNA. But mitochondrial DNA is very helpful in genetic genealogy, even if in a small amount. I'm going to provide a couple of historical examples about Y chromosome and mitochondrial DNA today. I won't be able to talk about these things in greater details because the presentation I've been told has to be very short. So nuclear, so we have DNA, we have traditional genealogy. We bring the two together, and we're going to have a number of advantages. First of all, one of the things DNA does is that when we have our DNA tested, usually it's going to end up in the database of the company that provide the results, the test for us. We pay for a test, either the Y chromosome, the mitochondrial DNA, the autosomal DNA. The company, we pay for that. The company provide us with results. So they'll tell us, this is what your DNA look like, but that's not very informative. And the other things that is very informative is that they're going to take that DNA and compare it to all the other people that have been tested with them in their database. They're able to keep privacy, but the cool thing is that now there are these databases where we can match our DNA again. So what's going to happen is that sometimes we find some matches of individuals that we don't know anything about, and we know that those are our genetic cousins. When we start contacting them and talk to them about how we could be possibly related with each other, then we bring in the genealogical information that we have. And in some cases, that genealogical information is also found in these genetic databases. And so besides finding a list of matches, we also might be able to see the genealogy that is linked with each one of these matches. And that is going to help us see how possibly we are related. So DNA will show us that we are related. The traditional genealogy will show us how we are related. So we bring the two together, and we can do a number of things to extend and verify our genealogical knowledge thanks to these connections that we find. So here is a traditional family tree. You have an individual at the bottom, a male or a female. You have 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, and so on and so forth. The number of ancestors double at every generation. So let's look at the three of the 4 systems. We talk about Y chromosome, we talk about mitochondrial DNA, autosomal DNA. They're all represented here, overlaid over this pedigree chart. The one that is not showing here is the X chromosome. I have a couple of pedigrees to show that on different slides. So let's look at this one. First of all, Y chromosome. Y chromosome is found only in males. It's the chromosome that determines the male gender. It is not found in females. So a woman that would like to have a Y chromosome study done she will need to ask one of her male relatives to be tested in her stead. She could ask her brother, she could ask her father, she could ask a paternal uncle, a paternal cousin, or a paternal nephew, somebody that will share her maiden name and is a male. Her children will not be good candidates because they will have the Y chromosome of her husband and not of her paternal line. So that's the only limitation if you are a female and you would like to do and engage with a Y chromosome study. If you're a male, you can have your own Y chromosome tested, and that will provide you information about your straight, direct, unbroken, in many cases, surname paternal line. And the benefits of knowing the Y chromosome and be able to match it with other individuals are many. One, the classic one, the most popular one, is to be able to identify your paternal line and in some cases even your surname line if you're adopted. You can also verify if another male who share your same surname or similar surname is related to you because you share a common paternal ancestor from which you have received, from whom we have received the same surname. Mitochondrial DNA follows the maternal line, is a mother to all of her children. So both males and female receive their mother mitochondrial DNA. However, only female pass that mitochondrial DNA information on to the next generation. So as a male, I carry my mother mitochondrial DNA, but none of my 5 children have my mitochondrial DNA. They all have my wife mitochondrial DNA. And I'm not going to go into the biology of how that works, but just know that during reproduction, if you are a male, you received your father Y chromosome, and and all of the children receive their mother mitochondrial DNA. So here is two markers that can tell us something about our maternal and our paternal line. Autosomal DNA is inherited from all of our ancestors, is inherited on the rate of 50% at each generation. That means that the good news is that we're able to pass 50% of our DNA. The bad news is that we lose 50% of our DNA. You know, the story of the glass half full or half empty. Now, we all have 50% of each of our parents' DNA. We may or may not have a 25% of our grandparents' DNA because, again, the autosomal DNA is inherited due by falling by chance, and so it becomes a probability starting at your grandparents' level. So on average, you have 25% of your grandparents' DNA, but you might have as little as 0% or as much as 50% of each of your grandparents. Of course, that does never happen. But as you go back in time to your great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents, then you start observing that some grandparents or great-grandparents, some of your ancestors, might have contributed to some of your autosomal DNA, while others simply disappeared due by chance. And so if we look and go back 10 generations, we're only going to have about 10 to 12% of our ancestors that contributed to the DNA that we have today. Now, this is another very popular chart. You can Google them and find many that will show you how many individuals, how much DNA they share with you, not only going back in time, as you saw from the previous slide, but with your lateral lines. So how much DNA you have in common with your uncle or your aunt or your first cousin or your first cousin once removed. And so you start seeing these percentages, and there are other charts that are more complex. They actually would include the average estimated amount of DNA, not in percentages, but actual quantities, and also the range of that has been observed for a specific relationship. Now, there are over 7 billion people on the earth today, and of course, we can't expect that each one of the people that live today had an infinite amount of ancestors. Our life, because of the fact that the number of people that live today on the earth is the largest number ever to live on the earth. That means that every year, as we go back in time, that number becomes smaller and smaller. And so the total number of the population going back in time shrink. However, our pedigree charts do exactly the opposite. They would double at every generation. So there must be a point where we all meet together, our ancestors merge together. And here is a computer representation of what I'm talking about. We have people living today, and we have ancestors, and then we have this mixing, this mix and mess in the middle, where all the lines come together. What does that mean? It means that we share all of our ancestors at one point or another in time with everybody else on this planet. In fact, it is estimated that everyone with European ancestry share all of their ancestry between 15 and 25 generations in the past. That is about 400 to 600 years in the past. And that means I have no, being Italian, I have no unique ancestor that are mine, but all my ancestors within that range of generation is also found on everybody else pedigree chart. Consider also that not everybody that lived, let's say in the 15th century, not everybody that lived at that time was able to marry or have children or grow to adulthood. And so the number of actual ancestors is much smaller to all the people that are alive today. They did a study in Iceland where they look at the pedigree charts for the last 300 years of all the people that live in Iceland today. And based on only on pedigree information, on genealogy information, on DNA, just on genealogy information, they were able to observe that about 10% of the people that lived in the 1700s are the ancestors of about 90% of the people living today. So very small number of ancestors for a bunch of people that live today. Now, this is the X chromosome chart. There is a different inheritance pattern for males and versus females. If you are a male, you have inherited your Y chromosome from your father, so you have no X data from him, but you have received a whole X chromosome from your mom. Now, your mom has two copies of the X. She does not have the Y. So she would have given you one or the other or a mix of the two. Now, likewise, where did she get the two X chromosomes? She received one from her mother, which will be your maternal grandmother, and it could be one or the other or a mix of the two. And then she would get the whole one X chromosome from her dad, and that would have been the second X. So when you receive an X, you may have received part of your maternal grandfather X chromosome and part of your maternal grandmother X chromosome, and that's where this X chromosome come from. So as you can see, as you go back in time, those are the people that may or may have not contributed the X data on your the genes, the DNA on your X chromosome. Now, if you are a female, you have two X's, one you receive from your father and one from your mother. So now you have this part of the pedigree as well as this other part of the pedigree that are represented. But you see all the other ones that are kind of gray on this chart, they will not have contributed the X chromosome or any X chromosome data to you. So X chromosome data may help in determining which side of the family or which lines of the family you may be related with somebody. And it's mostly helpful when you combine that with other type of tests, including maybe the mitochondrial DNA test or the autosomal DNA test, and then you overlap or you add the X chromosome to it, and then you can verify if you're following a maternal line or you're excluding the paternal line. So now let's close this presentation talking about two historical cases. Those are the first two cases that became popular and made popular genetic genealogy testing. They were mostly forensic testing at that time, but that's where the idea to use this information and this knowledge for genealogy came from. The first one is with the Romanov family in 1918. They were murdered in Ekaterinburg, Russia, and the body were buried secretly. No one really knew where they were, and then eventually they found some sites where these bones were retrieved. Now they needed to know if that is were the bodies of the Romanov family. So what they did, they extract mitochondrial DNA from all of the remains, and then they reconstructed a pedigree information. So what you have here, right in the middle, is the Romanov family. You have the Tsar Nicholas and his wife Alexandra, and the 5 kids, the 4 girls and the last boy, Alexei. And so what did they do? They tested the mitochondrial DNA. Of course, all the children would have the mitochondrial DNA of their mother, and so what we needed to do now is to verify that this was indeed Alexandra mitochondrial DNA. Then the father would have had a different mitochondrial DNA, and he would have received that from his mother, and so a different type of test that needed to be done. Now, in those days, even today, all the royal families would tend to marry with other royalty. And so in the case of Alexander, she was the granddaughter of Queen Victoria of England, and she is the great aunt of Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. So Prince Philip was also tested for his mitochondrial DNA, sharing the same maternal line. See, you have Queen Victoria and then her daughter, and then you have Alexandra, but then you have a sister of Alexandra whose grandson would be Prince Philip, and it would work because boys, males receive mitochondrial DNA from their mother. So you have an unbroken mother line right here made by circles. And that mitochondrial DNA match between Alexandra and Prince Philip and all the children. Then for the husband, Tsar Nicholas, they tested other individuals that also shared their maternal line with him, and that was also a match. So through mitochondrial DNA, they were able to conclusively understand and prove that the bodies that were found were those of the Romanov family. They were also able to use mitochondrial DNA to exclude somebody that pretended to be one of the children. If you remember the famous story of Disney movie of Anastasia, and that child that they say survived, they actually find the exact number of children, so that wasn't a problem. But in the beginning, they did not find one of the girls and the boys, and they were buried a little bit to a distance, and then they were able to find those as well. By 1920, there was somebody that pretended to be Anastasia, and through mitochondrial DNA, that was excluded. Now, for Y chromosome, the popular case was that of US President Thomas Jefferson, and it is said that he may have had an affair with one of the slaves on his property, and their name was Sally Hemings. And there is an unbroken line. Here you have the pedigree chart on the left. You have Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson did not have any boys. He only had one daughter, so no Y chromosome line there. But we were able to get through his uncle a line right here. You have Phil Jefferson, and then all the way down to to a living descendant today. Okay, I'm trying to get my laser pointer to work. Here it is. So you have a living descendant through President Jefferson uncle all the way down, and that's where the Y chromosome was taken for the Jefferson family. And then here, the more complex and extended pedigree is that of Sally Hemings, where she had one of the children that was born from their relationship. His name was Easton, right here, the last one on this side. And he had some children and boys, and all the way down to this man, John Wilkes Jefferson, and his Y chromosome, which also has some rare or unique characteristics, was a perfect match to the known, a documented Jefferson line. Of course, these people did originally not have the Jefferson name, but they adopted that. They actually take that name based on family rumor and tradition, and then eventually that was proof that it was indeed the Jefferson family. Now, this does not prove that Thomas Jefferson was the father of Easton. It could have been a Thomas Jefferson brother or another male relative that had a relationship with Sally Hemings, but historical closeness, would have probably indicated that that was the man that we're talking about. So just really quick, how did it start? Well, this all started in 1999, where a couple of people, Bennett Crispin, that is the founder of Family Tree DNA, took the information from the Jefferson family and say, a little light bulb came up on his head and say, why don't we use this for our own family history? So he started this company, which is still existing today, and provide Y chromosome, mitochondrial DNA, and autosomal DNA testing, and they ship all over the world. A man from the UK, a professor of genetics, started a company called Oxford Ancestors back then. The company that doesn't exist anymore, and Brian Sachs is no longer with us. But those were the first two commercial companies that were out there. There are many more today. I'm going to show you that in the next slide. My involvement started about the same time. It was August 1999, where BYU Professor Scott Woodward, molecular biologist Scott Woodward, got together with James Sorenson, a Utah philanthropist, founded the Sorenson Molecular Genealogy Foundation. I was hired at that time to bring together some information, some data, and help in the field of genetic genealogy. That's how I was involved back then. Our was a non-profit organization. The data we collected and produced was then eventually acquired by Ancestry.com, and it is used as the reference database. So these are the big players today. If you like to have a DNA test, that's where you should go. MyHeritage and Family Tree DNA and Ancestry, they all sell living DNA as well. They all sell in the UK. I'm not sure about 23andMe. They all provide autosomal DNA tests, but Family Tree DNA is the only one that provide Y chromosome mitochondrial DNA testing. What do you need to do when you decide which company to be tested with? Well, first of all, look at the size of their databases. How many people have been tested with them? The more people have been tested with them, the higher the chances you're going to find meaningful connection. Ancestry.com and 23andMe each have more than 10 million customers in the databases. Ancestry.com does not offer a chromosome browser, which is a tool that allows you to compare and view each chromosome and see which section do you overlap with somebody else. That allows you to do some triangulation, which allows you to find common ancestor between two or more people. That can be bypassed by downloading the data from Ancestry.com and uploading on other databases that allow you to do the uploading and do provide a chromosome browser. So, for example, you can download your DNA data from Ancestry.com and upload it in Family Tree DNA and use Family Tree DNA chromosome browser. Another determining factors is if you can download and upload your raw data. Ancestry.com and 23andMe do not let you upload other companies' data. So you if you want to use their databases, you have to be tested with them, but then you can take the data and upload it somewhere else. Family Tree DNA is the only one that offers Y chromosome mitochondrial DNA tests, so you might wanted to do that. I would suggest you do autosomal DNA test first, and then eventually, as you become familiar with how these things work, then you can expand into Y chromosome mitochondrial DNA testing as well. Depends on your budget, the questions you have about your family tree, how urgent or critical having those tests are. Family Tree and 23andMe offer information about Y chromosome mitochondrial DNA haplogroups. So Family Tree DNA, because they test your Y chromosome mitochondrial DNA, provide that by default. 23andMe does not, you cannot buy Y chromosome mitochondrial DNA data from them, results from them, but they will provide you some information about them, including their autosomal DNA. And this link right here on ISOG, the International Society of Genetic Genealogy.org, provide a nice table with a comparison with all the different companies, and you can make an informed decision about which company you want to be tested. So this is all for now. I Hope you enjoyed this presentation, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. You find me on Facebook, and I have a Facebook page called Genetic Genealogy Consultant that you can find. And this is it for today. Thank you very much, and you enjoy the rest of your event.